gardeners, but Carol Warner prefers the stately Siberian and Japanese varieties. The story of the garden and the gardener on A Gardener's Diary.
It started as a hobby, but now Carol Warner is hooked on irises. Her two sons, Andrew and Jeff, even got her a license plate that tells her story. It started when her mother-in-law got her to visit a garden with award-winning irises, and the rest is history. Now an award winner herself and deeply involved with the National Iris Society, Carol runs a mail-order nursery business from her home that specializes in the Siberian and Japanese iris varieties. Carol, we're here in Upper Co, Maryland, my first visit to Upper Co. It's really a rolling countryside terrain, and you're right outside Baltimore?
About 20 miles north of Baltimore, yes.
And it's obviously springtime. The Siberian iris and all the other blooming things, your garden is just really full of color right now. But how many Siberian iris do you grow?
About 200, I think, and about the same number of Japanese. Then I have several bearded also.
Well, with 200 different types, that's a pretty long season.
Yes, it is. That makes a good season because some are early and some are late, and we're seeing some of the later ones now.
And I can't help but notice this one right here with all the beautiful markings on are these the petals?
Or the falls.
The falls, that's right.
Right, the standards stand up and the falls come down on an iris.
And look at the bud, just the whole form of that flower is so graceful and beautiful.
I like it very much. It's actually one of my hybrids, or my only introduction thus far. It's called Shaker's Prayer because it is a simple kind of flower. It moves in the breeze. It's quite tall, and the thing that's very nice about it is it grows in most areas of the country. Siberian iris is like a cool area, and they don't do real well where it's hot, where it gets hot quickly in the spring. And so this one does fairly well even in those conditions.
Shaker's Prayer, and you selected that?
I did.
Was that exciting to go through that whole process?
It's been very exciting to name it and register it with the Iris Society and introduce it. And it won several awards on its way to getting the highest award, which is the Morgan Wood Medal.
And it's so different from the Siberian iris over here, which has broader foliage and much bigger falls on the flowers.
Right, that's something that's nice about Siberian iris. There are many different forms, and most all of the forms are acceptable. This one has the much rounder falls. This one is Jaybird, and I think it's one of the nicest of the blues.
Now, most Siberian iris grow in cooler climates, and this would be hardy as far as Maine, I would think.
Oh, definitely, and Canada.
And the foliage is so clean, and even when the flowers are finished, you're still going to have that beautiful accent of that foliage.
That's the wonderful part of Siberian irises. After they're finished, I remove the stalks, and then you have what looks like an ornamental grass at the end, and in the fall it turns a golden color and then finally dies down. The foliage is gone by about Thanksgiving or so. And then in the spring comes all up again.
It's pretty good for almost a four-season plant, and
yes.
I like the way you've got it paired up with this Japanese maple in the background. Those colors together are lovely.
I like the blueness against these colors and the other perennials in here, and the white rose in the background.
That's a pretty white rose.
Thank you. That's iceberg.
That's a healthy iceberg.
It has done wonderfully well. It did so well that I didn't even cut it back this spring.
So we have Jaybird and iceberg.
Right. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Jaybird and iceberg. Yes. This piece of property where I garden is part of my parents' original farm. I grew up here, and this was a cornfield and a pasture, and the property was just a clear field. with a fence sort of that went across it, and fence along the woods for cattle. And so after clearing that out and getting some grass established, that was the beginnings of the garden.
The peonies, the herbaceous peonies, are good companions for Siberian iris.
Wonderful companions, because you have the same overlapping bloom period, and then you also have the great foliage for the entire rest of the season, and you have such a contrasting foliage with the spikiness of the iris and then the broader foliage of the peonies.
And I like both the singles and the doubles. This single pink is just with the center with all those filaments, I guess. Those are just gorgeous.
I like a lot of the single ones because they don't tend to fall down as much as some of the larger double ones.
Now, what single variety is that?
This is Imperial Divinity.
And what about this luscious, this is just so full.
Isn't that gorgeous? That's Moonstone. It's one of my favorite of the late peonies because it is so double. And it shows slightly pink when it first opens and then gets just a little bit lighter. You get the white color, so you have a combination of colors on the plant.
With your herbaceous peonies, do you, after the blossoms finish, do you cut them off and then just leave the foliage, obviously, for the rest of the season?
Yes, I do. I take a scissors and just cut right down to one of the nice leaves and sort of shape up the bush. And I take all seeds off of everything because it takes a lot of plant energy to make seeds.
The colors together, that Siberian iris in the back, those two, the deep purple, the pale purple, they all seem as if they were designed to go together, don't they?
They do. And I like the fact that that one tall Siberian, the dark purple, is taller than the fence.
I do
and
too.
I get a variation in heights here.
These full, colorful blossoms are what traditional gardeners think of when they think of iris.
By planting a variety of iris types, Carol Warner has an extended spring bloom season in her garden in Upper Cove, Maryland. Even though irises are her favorites, Carol recently developed a fascination with miniature plants, almost by accident.
One of my newest gardens occurred because we closed in the back porch with glass, made a conservatory, and then that created a planting area for me outside of the glassed area. And I wanted to use very miniature plants, and it was just like planting a dollhouse garden because I could use real small rocks, and I have these little tiny plants that don't get any taller than a foot or 2 feet. There's a little tiny Alberta spruce in that garden, and called Pixie, and a hemlock called Minuta, and a tiny little holly, and a tiny little cataniaster. And it's been wonderful to see those little tiny plants make a really cute little garden that you almost have to get down on your hands and knees to see.
This is a classic bearded iris, and a lot different. The flower's a lot fuller than you would get with a Siberian iris.
Correct, much larger, and this is what people typically think of as an iris. They
Right.
think of the bearded iris. And the beard is this fuzzy portion right here on the top of the fall. And this one is Gypsy Romance.
Beautiful color.
It is. It's a lovely color, and it performs very well. The clump is vigorous, and you get a lot of stalks.
And how long a period would you get bloom out of this?
I would say 2 weeks. It has a large bud count, and if they open in succession, you have a long bloom period.
And you've got another one, another bearded iris right next to it with is that a bicolor? Or
That's really a plicata.
what does plicata mean?
Plicata is a dotted kind of color,
Okay.
or the color just on a band around the outside of the iris.
Okay. But it is a bearded iris.
Oh, yes.
And I like the pink iris here that goes with this beautiful styrax.
I like that combination. This whole area here is pink and purple.
And that's also a bearded iris, so this is an area where you've got a lot of bearded iris. Which variety is that?
That one is called Pink Rose.
Pink rose, and it does this styrax for a small to medium size flowering tree. That Japonicus, that's pink chimes. That's a good, unusual flowering tree. It's an alternative to a dogwood or something.
Right. And I think that would be better in your southern climates maybe than it is even here. I've seen beautiful ones in North Carolina.
One of the things you have is lots of space to grow so many different types of Siberian iris, and this color is paler than a lot of them tend to be, that dark purple or purple blue, and I just love that soft, what would you call that, lavender?
I guess you'd call that lavender. There's a light lavender standards and darker purple falls, but you see it gets darker in the middle, and there's almost a magenta color in the center too. This variety is called Shall We Dance, and it's a later blooming one, and quite a nice round, more ruffled flower. And some of them even have a red spathe to them, which adds color even before they bloom.
And this tricolor beech is really a focal point of this whole garden.
Yes, it is. And the pink color or red color lasts the entire season. I have a large property here. I have 9 acres with maybe an acre in flowers or flower beds and trees. And this draws your eye from the other side of the garden over to here.
I like looking up through this beech.
Yes, you almost get a rose pink color with the sun coming through. Or a fuchsia almost in some places.
Another spectacular tree in Carol's garden is a special variety of dogwood. Plus, a look at some new Siberian iris selections when we continue.
In the late spring, colorful irises fill the landscape of Carol Warner's property in Upper Co, Maryland. Carol also takes advantage of her 9-acre property to display some spectacular trees. This is a magnificent specimen paperbark maple.
Yes, it is. I like it here because of the bark interest all season, but especially in the winter when more of the bark is peeling.
And I like the foliage as well. For a maple, it's not a traditional type maple. You don't necessarily think of a maple with this type of foliage.
Right, and this tree has probably been here for at least maybe 18 years. And it was not a large-sized tree, but it was probably 1.25 inches in diameter trunk when I purchased it. It wasn't just a little tiny sprig.
This Coosa dogwood is one of the, if not the largest, certainly one of the most grand specimens I've seen. Is it a special selection?
No, as a matter of fact, it was just a very small seedling, maybe 2 inches tall, that I got at a iris convention in Boston. And I took it home to the hotel room and kept it in a wet napkin, and then brought it home, potted it up, and the following year planted it here in the garden. And about 18 years later, we have this wonderful huge specimen, and it's gorgeous every year. It starts out a chartreuse green color and then goes to the white color, and the blooms last a long time.
And Coosa dogwoods, Cornus Coosa, they don't have nearly as many problems as some of our native Cornus Florida have been having.
Right, they don't get that fungus.
The dieback.
Right, and I've never seen it to have any problems.
And it blooms later.
Right.
Than the native dogwood.
Yes, it does.
And do you get pretty red fruits on yours?
I do. It's just covered with red fruit in the fall.
You've got this whole row of Siberian iris, and they're, at first glance, they look very similar, but On closer inspection, I see there's a lot of variety.
Right. Now all of these are my seedlings. This year I'm going to introduce 2 of these seedlings.
Which 2?
I'm going to do number 10 and number 14.
Okay, I see they're
Yes.
numbered along here. Number 10?
Number 10 is an introduction this year. It's called Velvet Prism.
Velvet Prism.
It has quite a range of colors in it, this blue flash over and then the white rim
It's
around
gorgeous.
it. It really stands out in the landscape. There's a plant over here near a tree and the color just pops out, I think, at you. And the other one that I'm introducing this year is this one here, and it's an early bloomer, so we're seeing the last of it. But this
Ooh,
is
look at
one
that.
called 12th Night. This was seedling 12,
okay.
and that's night with a K.
All right.
Planting different iris varieties gives an extended season of bloom. But one variety of Japanese iris is overlapping with the Siberians. Carol tells us why when we continue.
Carol Warner's garden in Upper Cove, Maryland has all kinds of plants that add color to the late spring landscape. Although she specializes in iris, Carol doesn't limit herself in any way.
It has a lot of different things in it. I guess it shows my liking for perennial plants and especially irises and peonies and rhododendrons, but there's also early bulbs in the garden, and there's a lot of daylilies and hostas in the shady areas, and so it's just a plant lover's garden.
This is a particularly tall clump of Siberian iris.
I think this is the best of the landscape Siberian irises. It's quite tall. The name is High Standards.
High standards.
High Standards, maybe because the standards on the iris are high, or maybe because of the height, I don't know. But it has excellent foliage. It's extremely vigorous grower and blooms again over a long period of time. We have stalks coming in here that are just coming, and it's been in bloom for at least 2 weeks already here.
Well, how long has this been here? This is just gorgeous.
I think this one's probably been here about 4 years, but it's very vigorous and it will do no matter what.
This iris, this is a Japanese iris, is that right?
Right, this is a Japanese iris, or Iris ensata. The Japanese iris is usually a flatter flower and larger, and usually blooms much later. And also the leaf on the Japanese iris has a midrib in it. You can feel there's a rib in the leaf, whereas the leaf on a Siberian iris is completely flat when you feel it. So that's how you can tell the difference if you don't know exactly what you have. And normally we don't see them blooming along with the Siberian, but this is an extremely early variety. This is a seedling that a gentleman up in Vermont has created, and he's breeding especially to get early blooming varieties, so that's why we're able to see it.
Aren't the Japanese iris able to grow in conditions that are a bit more wet?
Definitely, and they will also grow in standing water all during the season unless the water freezes. They're not able to freeze in the water, but they do grow in standing water in very damp areas. This is ground that I grew up on, being able to be in the garden and I guess the peacefulness of the garden, and being able to see it early in the morning and being able to see it late in the evening. It's just a treat to be able to live in this area with this much open space and flowers around me.